Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone today. And some of you I know came from quite a long way. One of my friends actually came from Arizona just for this event. Adrian, where are you? And this lovely lady, Regan, back here, she came from another conference that I just met her at. So I like to hijack people. First, I'd like to take the temperature in the room. Who is a social entrepreneur here or wants to be one? Hands lifted high. Who's an investor? Okay, great. All right. Well, first of all, I'd love to introduce my panel. Oh, do we only have one mic? We only have one mic. Oh, you don't have a mic. All right. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rashmi Gopinath. I'm a partner at M12, Microsoft Ventures. We're the enterprise investment arm of Microsoft. We typically invest in enterprise B2B companies in the early stage to mid-growth stage, so Series A through C, across a pretty broad spectrum, I would say, on the enterprise side, all the way from cloud infrastructure, AI, cybersecurity, data analytics, business SaaS. We invest across multiple geographies. So I'm based in the Bay Area. I lead our investments in US and Canada, and I also lead our India practice. I also have colleagues based in Israel, Europe, and other locations. We invest off the balance sheet. We have invested in about 80 companies in the last 3 years, so we've been fairly active. Coming back to the topic of social investing, while we actively do not go out to source investments in this space, if the social impact investments falls within one of those vertical spaces that I talked about of AI or ML or cybersecurity, we'd absolutely take a look at that. In addition to that, we also ran an AI for social good competition last year, and we had 2 winners come out of that we funded as a result of that. That is something we do plan to do on an annual basis, and happy to get into more details on that as we get through the panel.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Daryl Grant. I work for Topan Merrill Corporation, formerly Merrill Corporation. I've spent the last 20 years supporting public companies, as well as taking private companies public. I've done over 24 IPOs throughout my career. And one of the things that I'm most proud of throughout that 20 years is the executive community that I founded called Inspiring Connectivity. And this executive community of women includes female founders, female venture capitalists, as well as women in the C-suite, whether they be CFOs, general counsels, associate general counsels, as well as partners at law firms who actively take companies public and also support the corporate governance around social topics, environmental topics, and how do you become a better steward as a company in serving not only your customers, but society. So that's a little bit about me. I look forward to spending some time with you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Miriam Hart. I'm currently a student at Stanford as well as a teacher. I'm teaching a VR class in the CS department. I'm also a social entrepreneur. As an engineer, I build a lot of apps that help women in different industries, so I'm really excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Nick Brown. I'm the founder of Clear Purchase, and we are building new financial infrastructure for developing countries, specifically designed for the poorest people on this planet. So there are roughly 3 billion people that are earning about $2 a day that do everything with physical cash, and we're making it possible so everything can be electronic. All transactions can be electronic, and that breaks one of the barriers that traps the poorest people in poverty.
So as we know, social impact is really on the rise, and millennials want to have a greater impact. I think everybody here, it's a given at this time in history that most of these issues need to be addressed. What I'd like to know from each of you, or the entrepreneurs down there on that side, what inspired you, and could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Okay, I have a somewhat weird journey. I'm a super geek in the banking world. I'm the guy they don't let out and talk to normal people, because I tend to scare them. I've done pretty much everything you can do on the heavy-duty payment infrastructure, the behind-the-scenes systems, from the biggest banks in the world, biggest retailers, payment switches like Visa. I built Visa debit card. I've written data security standards for the financial services industry. I've done pretty much everything you can do. Then about 15 years ago, I joined startups, and I absolutely love the startup world. And I mean, when you get the bug, you can't leave it alone. You either love it or you hate it, and I love it. What I'm doing now, though, is quite interesting because I've gone back to my roots of technical ability, and I looked at developing countries, and I realized there wasn't any infrastructure, and people were using cash for everything. And I was going, I can build that infrastructure. I'm one of the few people that actually knows how to do that, and I can do something that's really going to help people. And the more I looked into it, the more I saw how horrendous life was for people that are living in absolute poverty, and they don't have access to the kinds of financial services that we take for granted. And so that is now the driving force for what I'm doing. If it's not reaching them, if it doesn't provide access to them, then I'm not interested. So that's taken over what drives me now.
So Miriam, would you like to speak about
Sure.
your journey?
Yeah. I would say for me, one of the main reasons why I'm very passionate about working in the social impact sector is because one reason, I'm a woman, and a lot of people in this room can understand that that's not easy. Especially growing up, I recognized that a lot of the girls in my community weren't encouraged to pursue STEM courses. They were more encouraged to marry a rich man. And that's not something that I strive for. I strive to be the CEO instead of marry one. And so I think that I want to inspire women. I want to be there for women. I want to help women realize that they can actually achieve anything. Just like I think that people have inspired me to think that about myself. And so that's one of the reasons why once I realized that I really love like technology and building things with technology and making an impact and sharing my voice through it, I started building things that help other women and building things that help other people that need that extra help that they aren't getting. So one example of something that I've done is build an app called Browse. And so the apps in the App Store are very underrepresented in female markets and industries, like the beauty industry. I think that has to do with the fact that less than 4% of app developers are women. And so that's why I wanted to actually build an app that impacts women's lives. And so Browse, you take a photo of your face, and using image recognition technology, it finds a shade of your eyebrow, and then it matches different beauty products that have the same shade. So since a lot of women might know that a lot of different, the brow colors are always different on each product, and it's very confusing to know what the right brow color is for you. So it kind of does that for you. And yeah, so that's just one example. I would say another reason why I'm very into the social impact sector is because about 2 years ago, I went with my mom to India, Rajasthan, India, and we did this elephant sanctuary charity thing. It was really cool. And we got to travel from Jaipur to Jodhpur, so across the whole Rajasthan. And we went through all the really rural communities there. And it was so crazy for me to see these people living without technology in stone houses, and there were shepherds on the street. I felt like I went back to biblical times and seeing Isaac. It was really crazy. And I think that there's just so much work that we still need to do, and being in a place where we can actually make an impact and make a difference in the world is enough to actually do something. And so I feel not only that I should, but I need to make a difference and do something with this.
Widening the lens out a little bit, I'd love to hear Rashmi about the venture side from Microsoft's viewpoint.
Absolutely. So I would say two key areas that we're actively focused on. One is absolutely in increasing the number of female founders that we continue to invest in. It's a priority that's close to my heart. It's also something that Microsoft believes deeply in, is to increase the diversity numbers that we currently see today, which are abysmally low. There's less than 3% of all venture funding that goes to female founders today, and that number absolutely has to change. In terms of what have we done towards that, again, I went back to the AI for Good competition. We also ran a female founder competition last year, and that's again something that we plan to do on an annual basis. This was focused on B2B investments across US, Europe, and Israel. We expected to get about 250 applicants. As part of this process, we ended up with 700 applicants, which was fantastic because now we have a great pipeline of deals to evaluate and look at. The top 10 finalists that we evaluated as a result of this process, we flew them out to San Francisco for a final pitch competition and ended up investing in 2 companies as a result of that. Both the companies have been executing extremely well. We absolutely want to continue to do that. In our portfolio today, we have, I would say, roughly about a 20% representation of female founders. We absolutely have to increase that number. The second, going on the AI for social good, again, it's a priority for Microsoft. Deep roots, I mean, the core thesis or the mission of Microsoft is to empower every person on this planet to do more with technology. There is so much that technology today can achieve and make a difference in people's life, make it more productive, make it more effective, get them to a completely new way of living and enjoying and enriching their own lives that we absolutely want to fund and invest. So one of the companies that we invested in, it's called Admisogenics, which is an AI deep learning company that's using the power of AI to actually evaluate RNA splicing and come up with drug discoveries to prevent genetic defects in childhood diseases or even in cancer for that matter. The first one that they're going after is the spinal dystrophy defect, which is what babies are born with, and they're coming up with the RNA drugs that can help prevent that. Again, super important and super critical as you think about healthcare in the long term and what AI and machine learning and deep learning can really help in helping us get several, I would say, magnitudes over where we are today. One of the other companies that we invested in, Zen City, is really about bringing the voice of customer to corporate, the government policymakers and to the government so that the citizens can provide feedback into what is working, what is not working, and how do you slice through several hundred petabytes of that data to come up with like insights into what is lacking today and what should policymakers pay more attention to. There are several such initiatives that I'm sure we can all relate and talk to in terms of how technology can help make lives better, and those are absolutely ones that we want to know more about and invest in.
Daryl, you've taken, I think, 20 companies public?
24.
24, all right. Have you observed anything in the corporate or IPO space that, about impact, and what does that look like?
I think the trend is consistent with what we see in private companies when you compare private companies to public companies. A lot of the social impact initiatives are driven by the employees, and without employee engagement, many of these things don't get formalized. But there are some exceptions and outliers out there. One such company, Juniper Networks, has a really great ambassador program that they don't publicize, they don't talk a lot about. I just happen to have friends there, so I know a little bit about what they're doing. But they essentially selected a legal executive who's a female, and she kick-started this entire process. She serves as an ambassador for all women in the organization who are interested in new roles that would help them propel into senior leadership, and they tie them with their mentorship program. So it's a very formalized practice. So you see a lot of the social issues being solved by employees. Another company, AppLovin, Adam Forgy is near dear friend. He's a great guy, and they, as a private company, typically don't have budget for these social initiatives, but they put together AppLovin Cares, and AppLovin Cares focuses on the community and how do you help support the community, whether it be through direct investment into nonprofits or through programs that employees have taken personal ownership stake in, whether it be helping homeless, et cetera. So I do see companies engaging and moving forward with initiatives to help. And I think that trend will continue as you have founders who are founding companies that have both economic potential in terms of good businesses that will be successful, but are solving social issues. And as they are acquired by these larger companies, I think that affects culture and continue to drive things forward.
And you mentioned that you're seeing a little bit of gun shy in some of the companies. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think a lot of that comes from just companies figuring that, if they do something that could put them in the public eye in a negative way, it obviously can affect your earnings per share, affect your stock price, and things like that. So there is some gun-shy behavior as a result. But what we're seeing, regulatory bodies like the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, have put forward proposals for ESG, environmental and social governance. So public companies have to regularly report. It's not a firm mandate, but it is an expectation that companies disclose in their proxy statement to their annual shareholders what are they doing environmentally and socially to solve community problems, particularly for the customers that they serve. So, with that gun-shy approach, there still is an outward communication of what they're doing, and there is some pressure as a result of those commitments that are made through these disclosures.
I'd like to ask Nick a question going back to your discussion of machine learning. You mentioned that in your startup you have some interesting tech.
This is, I'm very focused on developing countries right now, and the poorest people on the planet. Imagine living on $2 a day. If you turn around the whole market equation, how can you offer a service to someone earning $2 a day? And this is where machine learning, especially somewhere like healthcare, if you can automate a lot of that, you could offer it as fully automated. This is the potential. It can be fully automated, and people can pay 5 cents for it. They can afford 5 cents. That opens the whole possibility of offering sophisticated health services to people earning $2 a day. That blows my mind. That is actually even possible. And that's where the future can be on this. So much potential there. If you can offer, you've got 3 billion people out there. That's a huge market. It's a matter of taking advantage of that, and we're right on the brink of that being viable. It's really exciting what's happening now.
Now, are you raising capital yet? And are you having any response in the market?
We're raising capital. It's difficult for what we do specifically. We're building infrastructure. Effectively, I'm building a system like Visa. I know how to do that. I've built Visa debit card. I'm one of the few people that can actually build it, but it's expensive. And so the most important partnership that any startup has is with their prime funder. You've got to have the right fit there. That's more important than anything. And it varies depending on the type of business you have, the markets you go into. You want someone that's on your side. You want someone that has the same goals that you do, because if you have a mismatch there, it's going to be a battle and it's not going to end up well. And generally, you're the one that's going to be suffering the most.
Miriam, what about you?
Well, I do have my billion-dollar idea, so I'm working on that right now. And then
Investors out there? Do you see any?
Yeah. So I think once I finish my research, R&D, I would say, I'm going to start looking for investment.
So are all the apps that you've produced, is there a business model or?
For Browse, there actually is a business model. So every single time somebody purchases a beauty product from the app, I get, through referral links, 5% of the product. So that's been keeping me well sufficed. But I haven't really been taking anything farther.
Rashmi, do you have any tips on the fundraising process?
I would say that on the fundraising process, from an investor standpoint, it's definitely important to talk and highlight about the same things that investors are going to care about. So from their perspective, obviously, the impact of what you're doing and the difference that it makes is important, especially for funds that absolutely focus on the social impact side. And there are funds like Omidyar Network and Kapoor Capital and others that come to mind. There's also Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that typically invests in startups that focus specifically on social impact in underdeveloped countries. But even for those funds, I would say the key factors obviously that matter is what is the team, how are you going to execute on that idea, how big can that market really get, and what is the ultimate value that you're driving. And as long as you can hit on those four things, honestly, those does not matter, like depending on, irrespective of what spaces you're in. I mean, those are the same things that every investor would look for. However, on the social side, it also matters on what the impact actually is and what difference is it going to make for them to get even more excited about that initiative. So that's what I would say is, as you're thinking about that. Going back to Nick, your point about building an infrastructure is expensive. I'm sure folks recognize that, but the impact of what that can have is really big too. And so if you talk about the market size of 3 billion or 5 billion and monetizing even at 4 cents or 1 cent for that matter, what can that really get the company to? I think that in itself is pretty compelling.
Can you walk us through what a deal looks like on your end? How does your team decide, and what's the average check size?
Absolutely. So we typically, like I said, we invest in the early stages. So Series A's and B's would be sweet spot for us. Our check size is between $2 to $10 million. We can lead and price a round, or we can co-invest in a round along with somebody else. In terms of what a good deal looks like at the end of the day, so if we backtrack, what are investors looking for? Return on capital. And so if we can backtrack based on how much you're looking to raise, what price you're expecting, and if we can match the valuation that we come up with that price, and then backtrack it into our exit valuation on we can generate venture-backed returns for that investment, is what gets us excited. The single most important parameter for any early stage, or for that matter, even growth stage deals, is the team. And this is a long-term engagement that the startup has with the investors and vice versa. And if you believe that the investor across the table believes in your mission, can help you get there, is passionate about this, and will see you through the end, and if the investor believes the same, you have a perfect match. So that's how I would say is evaluate the investor as much as the investor is evaluating the startup.
Daryl, do you have anything to add?
So there's, obvious tells, right? I mean, typically, there's reverse engineering happening with, startups who are looking at venture firms that may have invested in your space, and, maybe your company has some similarities, so you target those venture folks to, seek investment. But, I would say, there's certainly some value in, opening up the lens and even myopically focusing on investors. Like, there's a gentleman in Britain who's widely known as a social impact investor and leader. His name's Sir Ronnie Cohen. He founded Big Society Capital, which was the first social investment bank in 2012. He was a VC in the 70s, and by the 90s he had over 52 IPOs globally within the Apex fund that he founded. But today his sole focus and mission is to help entrepreneurs be successful, specifically ones who are out there looking to do more good. So, looking for a community of people who are like-minded in their care and their passion and their drive is certainly a good place to start, because traditional investments, though, M12, and other venture firms will invest in any good business that will net a positive return. Sometimes, if you don't sit across from someone who understands what your mission and passion and execution strategy is within this very unique space, you could find some hardships. So, my only advice would be to sort of, not only reverse engineer and find people who invest in your space, but look for the Ronnie Cohens of the world. And, maybe you find someone who believes in you and is willing to invest.
So a like-minded community.
Absolutely.
I'd like to open it open it up to questions. Does anybody have any burning issues? Okay. Please stand up.
Hi, I'm MK Hicks. I love the concept of impact investing. And we all have a choice in our lives we can do, as Miriam and Nick have pointed out, that you can do good or you can go down a different route. And I think we're seeing a lot more impact-focused, minded, resonating people. And your point, building on the community, do you think when you're going out and looking for funding for your venture, that you should even be considering venture capitalists, but we're focused on ROI, when you really want to have an impact metric? And then, of course, if you are a smart business person, in the end, you will be profitable because it inherently needs to be sustainable. So profit's okay. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a traditional profit. It's a for good profit. So wouldn't you be seeking investors that simply want to give you money, lots of it, to make a huge change in the world like Nick's project or other projects? And these VCs that all talk about ROI within 2, 3, 5 years, you don't really want to be talking to them. And do you think you shouldn't be, or should you be, because they will eventually come around and see the 10-year play that you might want to shift, as we're looking at through culture and gender, and huge shifts in our world need to happen to be viable in the sustainability question. Same sort of thing. Can you ROI water purity?
I'm glad you asked that question. So the short answer of it is, not every business is a venture investable business, if you will. Not just in the social impact space, but across other sectors as well. If you believe that your goal is not to get an exit in the next 7 to 10 years, you should think about other ways of funding the business. And there are plenty of other ways to fund the business. You can do it through friends and family. There are angel investors. Like Dara mentioned, there are specific investors that only are looking for creating an impact on social good. They would be willing to sustain the business for the long run, irrespective of whether you seek an exit or not. There are grants that you can get from foundations. Like I mentioned, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they're not investing with the intent for an exit or a return. So there are plenty of other channels to fund businesses. Venture is just one aspect of it with a very tangible goal at the end of it. So if those goals don't match, absolutely, yes, you should not be looking for venture investing.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. I'll give you guys a pretty solid example, Impossible Foods. Like, that business is about putting, I'm sorry if anyone loves beef, putting the beef industry out of business. And that's their sole objective. I've had the pleasure of spending time with Pat Brown on a one-on-one interview with him, me, and maybe 3 other people in the room. And it was the first time I tasted the Impossible Burger. Pat Brown's assistant came in and cooked it. It was like, wow, this is actually pretty solid. It's such, I've kept in touch with them, but that's they've gotten funds from Google, other traditional VCs, but their mission is very clear. They're not in the business of just, producing food. They're in the business to eliminate husbandry and replace the entire meat industry as we know it today, and that's sort of line one, and I think their goal is by 2035, so it's really not that far away. So you can find investors who will invest in your business if, in fact, they are aligned with your mission. It is, as mentioned, it's a long-term relationship, right? 7 to 10 or more years. So you're getting married, so that marriage needs to certainly work both ways. So keeping your options open is wise to do, but I would focus myopically on where the best bang for your time is in terms of people who are interested in investing in your company.
Nick has something to add.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, is like assessing what the best form of funding is and who from. It's an interesting path I went down because this is a rather unique startup I'm doing, and I'm building infrastructure. It's going to cost $8 million to build the system. That's what it takes, and that's a trimmed down version of Visa. It's going to cost, we're going to need $250 million once we go live, because the banks are not going to connect to a system unless they know it's going to be there in 6 years, even if you crash and burn and don't sell any product at all, because they're putting their reputation on the line. You can't really go down the traditional VC route with those numbers. So I had to look at what are all the different methods of doing this. And you were talking about the Gates Foundation. It's amazing what they've done. As a for-profit, getting a grant doesn't work well because you have to pay tax on it. It's considered income. You can get PRI funding, program-related investing, which is a below market rate loan. And it applies for the foundation towards their 5% requirement each year. It's surprisingly by the government, it's actually really well written. The regulations around it made it very easy. For higher returns, you've got MRI, so it's market rate investing. Again, those are loans, those are higher interest loans. There's other alternatives are revenue royalties. That's an interesting one as well. There's a lot of different varieties that are out there now that I'm just not sure were around that much 10 or 20 years ago. And as you were saying, the exit plan is part of it as well. No one's going to buy the company that I'm building. There really isn't a buyer out there, so that's off the table. So it really leaves the only option as being an IPO. Well, it's good to know that up front. It might take 5, 10 years. I've got a 20-year pipeline lined up behind this. This is going to be a fun ride for a long time. I want people that are going to enjoy being on that ride for a long time and not looking for a really fast return. The returns are going to be there, though. And so at the end of the day, you can say, hey, look, I had a really massive impact. At the same time, hey, I made a lot of money as well. Why not have the two of those work together? There's no reason why you can't make money while also having an impact. And that's something that it almost seems like it's appeared fairly recently in this world. And it's so good to see that.
Yeah, the issue of patient capital is becoming a big deal. In front?
Yeah, so do you all have any advice on how to actually find social impact investors and then connect with them?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Do you all have any advice on how to actually find social impact investors and then to connect with them?
Like I mentioned, there are plenty of funds that focus on social impact investing. Again, once you start working with a few of them, you will get connected through the network to the other folks as well. BMGI, which is the Bill Melinda Gates Institute, I mean, they do venture investing. They have a dedicated venture team that looks at social impact investing. There's the Omidyar Network, Kapor Capital. I'm sure there are at least 10, 15 other funds based in the Bay Area that specifically focus on social impact investing, and then there are others that are outside of the Bay Area as well.
Yeah, and use the internet. It's powerful. I mean that honestly.
Google is your friend?
Yeah, it is. It's totally your friend. So, for instance, if you were, solving an environmental problem, whether it be, with the air or the soil or et cetera, right? Google and find companies that are doing something similar to what you're doing or have done, and you can find out these venture-backed companies through Crunchbase, right? So it's most investors, most founders like to brag about who they raise capital from, so they'll include that information in there, or you can just ring them up. I mean, it sounds a little old school, but if there's a fellow founder out there, they'll not commiserate, but they'll support your, again, building community, your goals, and they know the path that you're traveling. So that's an easy phone call and an easy receipt, and you can just ask, like, hey, who's investing in our space? You know, I'm interested in doing X, and perhaps you can perform, not only make a friend, but find a ways to your path to secure funding.
People forget the power of the telephone. Any more questions?
So I have a two-part question. I'm helping two startups right now market their stuff, and they're looking for investors. And one question is, so let's say you have two startups that are aligned with the social impact that has all the same things. What would make an investor choose one over the other that's non-tangible? And the other part of the question is, if there's no investors to invest in them and they decide to take a loan, what are the things that they have to look for before they take that loan to kind of see if it would work out? I think you touched a little bit on it, but I just wanted to know like what that is. Yeah, thanks.
So I'm going to be more specific and talk specifically about M12 or Microsoft Ventures. If we would invest in a company if we can add value to that company beyond just capital. So if I can bring Microsoft resources to bear, be it the product teams or the sales, go-to-market channels, like pick your choice of what Microsoft can offer to a company. If I can say that here's how I can add value to you beyond just the capital that I'm providing, then it becomes interesting for me to invest in the company, because that's how I differentiate myself against the 200 funds on Sand Hill Road. At the end of the day, capital is capital, and there's plenty of capital available for the right companies. But we want to ensure that the companies in our portfolio can realize the greater good of what they can achieve by themselves by leveraging the power of Microsoft. So for me, regardless of whether it is a social impact investment or my traditional investment in one of the spaces that I mentioned, that is the number one thing that I would look for. And so when I go back to the two companies that we invested in, Envisagenix, which is on the AI for drug discovery, they're able to leverage the power of the AI models that Microsoft offers. They're able to leverage the power of the cloud that we offer and run those AI models on the high compute machines that we have. And we provide all of the technical help for them to get up and running, to leverage the right APIs, if you will, to leverage the right technology resources that we offer. And then we can help them take them to market. So connecting them with pharma companies, most of which are Microsoft customers as well, putting them in touch with Roche and Genentech and other folks. That becomes really interesting, and it becomes highly meaningful for that startup, in addition to just taking money from us. So that, I would say, is why, if I look at two companies, is why I might pick one over the other. If they both, I believe, will get us to that same financial outcome, or if it's social impact, it will be a combination of the financial outcome as well as the impacts that the company can have. On the debt side, I mean, this is a topic in itself, but every time a company takes debt from someone, you always have to evaluate the terms of the loan, the covenants that are associated with it. I don't think there's enough to cover in 2 minutes on what exactly that entails. It is pretty detailed. You would want to work with a few different options. So again, when you're coming to venture debt, there's Silicon Valley Bank and Square One, and there's 15 other options. There is growth term debts that you can get from a Hercules or somebody else. So evaluate multiple options, work with a lawyer who understands what those terms are and can walk you through exactly what that means. Anytime you take venture debt, you have to repay it. It's not like an equity investment where if the company goes under, I mean, it goes under. But in venture debt, you might still be liable for some of those payments, which may come through an asset sale. So just be aware of what you're getting into.
Adrian?
So, question for me is, what is the minimum Thank you. What is the minimum expectation for an investor when they're evaluating a company in terms of where the startup company is in the early life cycle?
So if we look at a seed or a Series A company, I'd say there's three key things. One is the team. Everyone has that billion dollar idea. Can this team execute it is really the top thing that comes to mind. And so making sure that your founding team has the subject matter expertise to deliver on that vision, how you're going to get there. If you can convince the investor across the table that you have a plan of how you're going to get there, there are obviously unknowns and risks at that point. But the more aware you are of what those gaps are and how are you going to fill those gaps over time would be interesting to know. The second is the market big enough? So going after a highly niche, small space may not be something, again, that is an investable investment. I mean, obviously you should pursue it if that's what you're passionate about, but that is not going to get the investor very excited about, because we want to see the big market that you're going after, because even if that market turns because of whatever external factors, if it's big enough, I mean, it's still going to be decent enough from an exit standpoint. And the third is the product, or what are you offering to the market? How is that differentiated? Obviously, there are incumbents in most spaces. Why is what you're going to bring to the table so differentiated that a customer will be willing to write a check to you versus somebody else? So I would say at the very early stages, those three is what we look at. There are not enough financial metrics for us to evaluate at that point.
One follow-up question. When you're talking about product, are you actually looking at like a full-blown go-to-market product, or you know, an MVP? What is the expectation?
Microphone so that it's being recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. So the question around product is, when you're looking at the minimum viable product, can you just kind of describe the expectation around that?
Absolutely. So at the seed stage, it's really more of an MVP. What is it that you're building? What does that tech stack look like? What is the ability for that architecture to sustain itself and competitive differentiation? And of course, you're going to add more to the product going forward. But if the core architecture of what you're building is not going to be able to sustain itself, a complete rewrite is always more expensive and takes a lot more time. So that's what we're really testing at the seed stage. At the Series A stage, we do expect the product to be out with at least a 1.0 version. There needs to be some level of product market fit that has been proven out with maybe 2 or 3 customers. Of course, if any of those customers are paying customers, that's even better. But that's typically what we look for. We're not looking for, everything that you need to know about the product. You've got a 3.0 version with hundreds of customers. That probably comes later at the later B or the C stages.
Actually, following up on what you just said, the MVP versus the full product. So we're talking mainly about software. So how about the hardware people? So if you are trying to generate funding to build the MVP, because hardware is usually very expensive, so how do you go about it? And so the MVP still needs to be providing everything. So it's almost the product. So how do you differentiate, and what kind of things do you want, should hardware people look for in terms of pitfalls and not fall into them? Because most of the either discussions are typically about software, and it's a very different world when we talk about something physical.
Absolutely. And I used to be at Intel Capital, so I funded semiconductor deals in the past, and I still have one now. They are extensively capital intensive. For semiconductor deals, I would say the early stage deals and I'm not going to generalize for all investors, I'm going to talk specifically about me. But if I were to invest in a semiconductor deal, just knowing the risk of what it takes to get to a tape out, I will invest in a team that is seasoned and has done that before. And so that's typically how I pick the choice of companies to invest in. There are spaces that we have actively stayed out of. For example, we at Microsoft, we have not invested in an AI chip company, even though that seems to be like the thing to invest in, and there's a lot of investment that has gone into this space. The reason is we don't believe that of all the companies that we've seen in this space, anyone has nailed the architecture yet. And that has been true because this space has been around for over 4 years now. The two companies that have been close to a tape out have missed out on the architecture, and now we're seeing a lot of the cloud vendors are building their own. And so it leads us to that question of, it is a big market, but if your big customers are building it themselves, who are you going to sell to? And so hardware is always one where there is, I would say, more risk to get to market. But again, going back on the other side of hardware when it comes to IoT, if you take IoT or sensors as an example, it is, I would say, somewhat capital intensive, but not to the same extent as semiconductor is. So again, the risk is different. We typically do not focus on hardware investments at M12, but semi or silicon is one area which we do. But in that, like I said, it's team that is paramount. And if it is a team that has, the one investment that I did, for example, which is in the SSD controller space, was led by a team that did the exact same thing at Marvell and took 4 products out to market, knows exactly what it takes to get that product out. So going back to the next question, he builds the infrastructure at Visa, and so if he were to build this infrastructure, we know that he has the experience and the ability to do that, which gives the investors a fair amount of confidence rather than a team that's doing it for the first time.
Right. Thank you.
I think there's a few in the back. Great discussion so far.
Hi, if you have a product that is an online marketplace or a digital sharing community like Airbnb, would you have to have the customers or some customers first before you'd invest, or VCs would invest or angels would invest to validate the platform?
I actually do not cover B2C at all for that very same reason but it's a marketplace.
It's for companies, it's company for excess materials. It's for the electronics manufacturing industry.
Okay.
So it's from companies to companies, it's not business to consumer.
Got it. I mean, if it's B2B, but a marketplace, in that case, I mean, yes, we would still want to see some customers. B2C, I have no idea how to invest. I wouldn't be able to tell that an Instagram was going to be a hit when I saw it come out. So it's just hard to evaluate unless you've been in the consumer space and you've had enough investments to kind of get a gauge for what's going to succeed and what's not. Very different on the enterprise side.
Nick, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing. So if I understood correctly, you're building a financial infrastructure for countries that don't have that yet. So what is your end goal? What would you like to achieve once you've finished building your product?
And I say one thing, I think you should tell them how small the transactions are so they get a sense and who your customers are.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So I knew so little about developing countries. I spent 3 years talking to people in companies in developing countries and the work over there and the challenges that they have because I didn't know what the market was like. We're talking about people that are earning $2 a day. I mean, these are minuscule transactions. What do they spend on an everyday basis? Maybe 10 cents to buy some rice. Any kind of system I'm going to build has to accommodate that. And the payment systems that we have here in the West just can't do it. The Visa, MasterCard networks charge a minimum fee of 20 to 35 cents a transaction because they have to, because of some of the challenges that they have in the way that they're structured. I had to modify that in order to make it possible to offer 10-cent purchases and be viable for everyone involved. So the fees are small enough so that people are quite happy paying them, and yet the different players make enough out of them to make it worthwhile them offering it. What makes this possible, and I'm maybe veering a bit, what makes this possible is that everyone now has cell phones. I mean, it's staggering. You've got people that are like herding goats on the side of mountains and they've got cell phones. It's absolutely amazing. The cell phone providers are now offering mobile money. It was started by M-Pesa in Kenya, and it was so successful that all the other cell phone companies either offer it now or they are building their systems. Now, those are all closed systems, so you can only send money to someone else that also has an account at the same place. I'm building the network that connects all of them together. So I can facilitate all those tiny transactions, but they have the customer, so I don't have to go out and get the customer. They're offering our services to their own customers, and they get to make money doing that. But we really are talking about tiny, tiny little transactions, and if you're going to do that, there better be a lot of them. If you're collecting maybe 1/10 of a cent on a 10-cent purchase, you better be making billions of those transactions to make this viable, because it costs a lot of money to run this system. So it's a volume game. And fortunately, from that perspective, it's a volume market. It's a matter of getting out there. 3 billion people. I mean, that's rather mind-blowing. I'm a numbers guy, and that rather blew me away. And a large part of that as well is that a part that I wasn't expecting, I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit here. A part I was not expecting was microfinance. I'd heard about it, I didn't really know very much about it. You got Muhammad Yunus pretty much started it all in Bangladesh in the mid-70s with Grameen Bank, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize for doing that. Grameen Bank does $2 billion of microloans a year. $2 billion a year in one country, and they're one of 3 big microlenders in Bangladesh. Roughly $200 for each person that's borrowing, so it's tiny loans. And these are 2 women doing small businesses in their home, and they offer services to the other people in the villages. Incredibly successful. The ones that are structured well do well and they last. The ones that are not structured very well, they tend not to last. So it sort of sorts itself out. But the numbers make this possible. You have, what is it? There are 100 million people get microloans a year. 100 million people. They are paying roughly 30 to 60% interest on those because it costs. Don't blame the lenders. It costs that much to process those transactions and to run that system. And part of what I'm doing is, it took a while for me to get this, is that I'm streamlining their systems. My system pretty much gets rid of their 3 biggest costs, so that I'm reducing the cost of microlending. Muhammad Yunus said, I think it was him that said it, that there are 100 million micro borrowers in the world right now. There are another 700 million that would borrow if they had access to the loan, to the credit, and it was cheap enough. Yeah, I want to make that happen. That's going to make a difference.
I think you said that it's empowering women the most. I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, yeah, this was another surprise. Was it something like 97% of all microloans are made to women? It's not that they're excluding men, it's that women are jumping on this. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that's the way it is. So what I've done is I've realized that really what I'm doing is I'm streamlining the ability for women, more than men, it's not they're excluded, it's just women take advantage of it. I'm streamlining the ability for them to find their way out of poverty by removing one of the barriers that are keeping them trapped there. And I'll tell you something, seriously, as a tech guy in a bank, yeah, we do some good stuff. I get to do something now that really helps people, and that's pretty cool.
A question in the front, if you could just wait for Alice running.
So out of curiosity, aside from the microloans, are there any other ways that having a digital currency significantly improves the lives of people in developing countries, like ways that we probably don't think about?
That's a really good question. We take so much for granted in this country that we don't really realize what we have access to. Doing everything electronically, the first thing is you're not carrying cash around. So you're not going to get mugged for your money. And until fairly recently, you would be carrying your life savings around with you. You get mugged, it's all gone. Well, it can be electronic now. And that's where mobile money is already providing that means of keeping your money safe through your phone as opposed to actually carrying it around with you. doing electronic transactions is really interesting because they can be really inexpensive to do that. So you can send money to people that are further away. Myanmar, for example, they have something like 3 million people in that country, I think. 3 million people that actually work in a neighboring country and send their money back home. Well, it's cash. How do you do that? It's difficult. If it was just a straight transfer, that makes life so much easier for them. But even on top of that is that we are so used to having credit available to us. What's that based on? It's based on our income. If income is cash, there's no history of income. If income now is electronic, then you're starting to build the basis for being able to get credit. And reliable credit, because they know, hey, look, this person reliably makes this much every day. You can start looking and saying, what are their spending habits? And you say, oh, they spend money well. They pay their bills on time. They're paid off previous loans. That can be built up electronically, which means that the ability to get access to credit electronically becomes viable, whereas right now, a loan officer actually has to go to the village and interview 5, 10, 15 people of your friends before they say that you are a good bet as far as a borrower. So to me, that's the most exciting part of all of this, that give it a year or two after this is out there, and all of a sudden, access to, you get so much more access to more financial services. They have no concept of getting a mortgage. Microcredit is the closest they come to. Well, they can start doing that.
We have time for one more question. I'll leave it to our lovely Alice.
Yeah, I have a question for the whole panel, actually, to tie the topic of female founders together with social impact. It tends to be that a lot of our social impact companies are actually created by women. That is the majority. So why is that?
Putting you on the spot.
If you guys want to answer.
We should ask the female
Women tend to
founders in
care
the room.
more.
Well, first off, women are amazing and they care about people. So I think that a powerful woman who wants to start a company is going to find a way to make money and still care for people. So I think that's one of the main reasons. That's a cool stat. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Nick?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, as a guy, it's sort of like I have a different perspective on things, that I'm very aware, I can see what's happening. And looking at, again, what's happening in developing countries, like where there is a lot more of a divide between male and female in the much more traditional roles. The men, there's so much activity happening, especially in Africa when it comes to entrepreneurship. It's brilliant. The men are looking at saying, where are the opportunities over here? The women, though, and this is where it gets exciting, I think that there aren't as many women in developing countries, and I think that can be something that can catch up. They're looking at what are the challenges in the home. They're looking at a different environment. They're looking and saying, what does our village need? As opposed to, here's an opportunity to make money, it's like, what does our village need? I think that's very simplified, but I think you get a lot more of that with women. I mean, I jokingly say that 97% of microloans are by women, and my answer to that is, well, that's because they're smarter than we are. And that's really half true, so.
Okay, we're voting for you when you run for president.
Please no.
Wow, this has been such a powerhouse panel. I mean, where do I start? I mean, everything from investment to why we're doing it and the passion that we bring behind it, as well as trends. I wanted to thank all of you, and once again to Plug and Play and all of you who came today. We look forward to more.